my signal? Did you hear my signal? All right, let's start, shall we? We have put together our list of speakers for next year, starting in September, and there they are. We're going to have two programs on owls back-to-back because our speaker in February, Marilyn, wasn't able to get here this year, but we lined her up for next year as well. So by the end of the meeting in March, you should know everything you need to know about owls. Okay. All right. The species in the spotlight this month is one that we have done. I looked at my records. It was 2 years ago. But for reasons that I'll show you in a bit, you'll see why I chose to look at this guy again. They're here right now. They're breeding right now on campus. Whoops. See how pretty they are? Let me try that again. I hit it up and the machine went to sleep and then it couldn't find it again, so hold on. There we go. They look better this way, don't they? The male on the left, the female on the right. These two pictures were taken by Mary Sonas, who's one of our speakers for next year. And if you look at the difference, the males are gray-blue on the back on their upper parts, and the females are more greenish, grayish-green. Underneath, the male has a bright yellow throat and breast, and the female is also yellow, but a little paler. And the male has this orange chest band, which is really neat. The female, no chest band, or if she has any, it's very subdued. The male has bright white wing bars, so does the female. And the male has a broken white eye ring. You can see that it's got a little white on top and a little white underneath. A full eye ring would be all the way around. And the female has a bit of an eye ring too, but again, it's more subdued. Now, this is the reason I chose to revisit these guys, because Maxine, who's sitting out here in the audience, sent me a few pictures of parullas that she took this spring. By the way, are they parullas, are they parullas, or are they parullas? All of the above. I grew up saying parula, so that's what I say, and nobody's going to tell me otherwise. But really, any of those pronunciations is okay. Anyway, female, oops, did it again. There's the female sitting on the nest and the male attending. And if you look at the nest, it looks like it's made out of two different kinds of material. Something on top and something underneath. And that really intrigued me because I've seen parullas nesting in the coastal plain. And when I've seen them here, the nests are usually so high in the tree that it's really hard to tell what's going on. But you can see that there are two different kinds of material here. And I was really curious. I knew what this material was, but I wasn't sure what that was. And that took me down a deep and complicated rabbit hole, which I have to share with you. So Maxine got these two pictures of the female carrying nesting material. And I looked at that, and I looked at that, and I looked at the tree that she was in, and I realized that what those are is they're flowers from this tree. Okay? They're sort of long, stringy flowers, flower clusters. And the tree that those flowers are in, you can see some that are still attached to the tree here. The leaves are compound leaves. That is, like here, this is all one leaf. This is a leaflet, and that's a leaflet. Okay? And the leaves are toothed, but just slightly. They're not jagged toothed. And I looked at that, and I thought, well, I know what that is. That's a box elder. And so I searched online, and sure enough, I found some really nice pictures of box elders in flower. Now, box elders are a kind of maple, but they're unusual in that they have compound leaves. Most maple trees just have simple leaves, you know, a little a petiole and a leaf. But box elders have multiple. For example, this is all one leaf. And sometimes they have 3 leaflets, and sometimes they have 5 leaflets. And so I was really glad that I was able to figure that out. But then I thought, okay, so that's this part. And what's this? Well, I recognize that just from my past. Does anybody recognize that by any chance? It's what? Usnea, exactly. It's called old man's beard, or beard moss, or old man's beard moss. But they do get old. They get quite old, I think. But they're not a moss. And the Latin name is Usnea, and there are lots of different species. This particular one happens to be Serratina, but Usnea is the genus name, and they're quite common in lots of different kinds of forests all over the globe. It's not a beard. It's not a moss. It's a lichen. So it's a symbiosis between a fungus and an alga, like these lichens on the tree. But it's a different one. That's a different lichen. But these old man's beard are just really neat looking things. Sometimes you walk into some kinds of woods, and they're just festooned all over the trees. Well, if you go to the coast and you find a parula nest, it's not usually made with Usnea. It's made with Spanish moss. And if you look at the Latin name, or the scientific name for Spanish moss, it's Tillandsia usneoides, because it looks like Usnea. You can see the rabbit hole that I went down. I just kept going down. Anyway, Spanish moss. So you've probably seen that if you've driven anywhere toward the coast in the swamps. But it's not from Spain. It's not Spanish at all. It's a New World organism. It's not a moss any more than old man's beard moss is a moss. It's not a moss. And it's also not a lichen. What the heck is it? Well, it's a bromeliad, which is a really common epiphyte in lots of rainforest habitats. They grow lots and lots of species, but it's a bromeliad, which is a flowering plant. It has flowers. They're little tiny things. You can't see them in here unless you look really closely at the right time of year. But it's a flowering plant, just like a rose or a petunia. Anyway, and they're related to pineapples. Pineapples are bromeliads. Okay, well if you go to the coast, that's what parulers use in their nests rather than, sometimes they use usnea too if that's around. But they like stringy stuff. And those box elder flowers are nice and stringy too. I think probably a little softer than old man's beard, so a nicer thing to lay your eggs in. Anyway, on we go. Our latest numbers for the nest box trail on campus. The chickadees and nuthatches and titmice, they're done. They only produce one brood a year unless something happens early on in the first brood, and then they might have a second brood. But they're pretty much done, although these titmice, at the time that Kay put these numbers together, the titmice hadn't fledged yet, but I bet they have now, as you'll see in a moment. But the bluebirds are well into their second brood of the season, and some of them are probably going to have 3 broods. They're prolific little guys. So that's where we stand as of a couple days ago. Here's a picture that Bob Berndt took. They live over in Coventry, and they had titmice in their bluebird box. And there they are. Can you count how many titmice there? Well, I can't. Some of them are underneath. They're hard to see. But there were 5 eggs, and all 5 hatched. So my guess is that there are 5 fledglings there. When these guys actually fledge, when they leave the nest, they'll be able to tell whether there are any of the 5 eggs are left. If all the eggs are gone, well then that means that they all made it. So they can count 5 baby titmice. Kay Edgar took this picture of some bluebirds at her house, and you can see the male, female, and baby. The male is feeding the baby. Looks like a mealworm, is it, Kay? Is Kay here? Yeah. Is it a mealworm, probably? Yeah. So that's kind of a neat picture, too. At my house, I noticed today I've got baby downy woodpeckers coming to the feeder and being fed by their parents. It's fun. All right, I think then we should let our speaker do his job. So let me introduce Bill Thomas. He's been birding since he was 12 years old, and by my addition, that means he's been birding for 76 years. Right? he kind of knows his birds after all that. Let me tell you a little bit more about Bill. He was an Eagle Scout and a Scoutmaster. He joined the Sierra Club when he and Cheryl were married in 1982. He's been involved in conserving wild lands and forest management planning in the Pisca-Nantahala National Forests. He and Sherrill led an effort to put the Horse Pasture River into the National Wild and Scenic River System. They were involved in the completion of the DuPont State Forest, establishment of Gorges State Park. He was on the board of the Carolina Mountains Land Conservancy for 6 years. He headed the North Carolina Sierra Club in 1990. His formal education led to a BS in chemical engineering from Princeton and a PhD from Wisconsin, followed by 33 years with the DuPont Company making photographic film. Bill and Sherrill moved to Carroll Woods in February 2022 from their home near the Blue Ridge Escarpment south of Brevard. So, Bill, let me start your... Yeah.
Okay, does that sound like it's about the right place? All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. And I have to say, this was a wonderful opportunity for me to go living in the past when I was younger and spry and running around. But I think any of you went who were to go to the Galapagos today, you wouldn't find much that's different from what I'm talking about. The Islas Encantadas, the Enchanted Isles, a fabled place lying on the equator and washed by the cold Humboldt Current, known since the 1700s, maybe a little earlier, as a stop where sailing ships could replenish food and water supplies. These desert-like volcanic islands have long been known for their wildlife, most particularly for the tameness of that wildlife. Oops. Okay. One of the factors that makes these islands so special is their location at the equator on the west side of the American continent, where major ocean currents collide with each other and with the continent. The usually dominant west-flowing south equatorial current is moving this way, allows the cold Humboldt current coming up the coast of Peru to rise to the surface. And that pulls a lot of marine life to the surface, so the marine environment is extremely productive there. When a so-called El Nino occurs, and there's one that's the scientists think is going to happen this year or late next year or early next year, warm water flowing from the extreme west side of the Pacific moves across and counters this south equatorial current, which means the Humboldt current is kind of stopped in its tracks and can't rise in the to the surface at the islands. You get more rain. The terrestrial species thrive because of the rain, but the marine ecosystem tends to collapse from lack of food. These El Niños happen every 3 to 7 years, and I don't think climate science yet understands why this warm water keeps sloshing back and forth across the Pacific Ocean. So most of the time, however, the Galapagos are a very rich marine ecosystem. These islands forming what is known as the Galapagos, which means turtles, by the way, are all volcanic. This map shows the major ones and their ages. That's ages in millions of years. I'm sorry, yeah. I guess that would be, oops. That's intended to mean 700,000 years. Yeah, so it's in millions of years. The map shows the major ones and their ages. They were all produced by the movement of the tectonic plate on which the Galapagos Islands sit. Across the rift zone, there are several tectonic plates that also meet in this region, and they're producing a rift zone, like in Iceland, for instance, where the plates rift apart and hot magma rises to the surface. And these islands come up as volcanoes initially to the surface. Since the motion of the rift, the net motion of the rift is to the west, the oldest islands are in the east, over here, San Cristobal, South Plaza, and so on. And the ones on the west are the youngest ones. So Fernandina over here is the youngest of all of them. Incidentally, this 2.4 billion years is about the length of time that humanoids have been on the Earth, if you want to kind of put things in perspective. They obviously offer a fascinating window into the theory of evolution. You know, first of all, how the species managed to get to the islands, and then how they managed to evolve on each island to become different species. This is Darwin's ship, the Beagle, a painting of it. I'm sure it's accurate. Anyway, Charles Darwin visited the islands in 1833, and the species he found became part of the evidence leading to his theory of evolution. It would have been hard for him not to notice that each island had a different set of species, but that in many instances the individuals of those species were very much like individuals on the other islands, as if they descended from the same family. So, you know, it leads to the idea that once a species got to the island, it began to diverge because it didn't have genetic contact with other species. Anyway, Cheryl and I had long thought about these islands, so when we got a chance, we jumped on it. We flew from Miami to Quito, stayed overnight, and then went on to Guayaquil on the coast of Ecuador, and then hopped the several hundred miles across the ocean to the small island of Balcha in the Galapagos. I understand there's another airport now on another island, San Cristobal, apparently the airport on Balcha was getting crowded. From here we traveled by ship, as shown by the arrows in this picture. Here we are coming in from Guayaquil, and then we got on our ship and followed these arrows around the islands. All of our major traveling was done overnight, so most of our days were spent on land. This is the equator up here, so you can see we crossed it a number of times. The first stop was Genovese, and then West Isabella, the largest island, and Fernandina in the west, the youngest. Then we traveled back east to Santiago, Santa Cruz, Hood, and finally back to Balcha in the airport. One thing worth mentioning is that only the longer 7-day trips have time to go all the way west to Isabella. And I wouldn't have wanted to miss those western islands. The way it works, maybe I ought to explain, is there are boats, both sail and motorboats, which house a number of tourists, maybe up to 10 or 12 or something like that. And when you sign up for a tour of the Galapagos, you're signing up with one of these ships. So you live on board the ship the whole time. There's Cheryl at the Balcha airport. It's actually a Ecuadorian military airport. And I got ahead of myself here. And then we were ferried out to our boat. in what they call a panga. It's just an inflatable raft with an outboard on it. And that was our boat. Oops, sorry. That was our boat for our duration, called the Alta. Here's half our gang loaded in one of the pangas. And the first thing we did after we were on board the ship was to go to a place called Black Turtle Cove and stayed until about sunset. The idea was to look around in the mangrove lagoons for turtles until it got too dark. We did see turtles, but I didn't get any decent pictures. After sailing all night, crossing the equator to the north, we had breakfast in Darwin's Bay on the island of Genovese, and then went ashore. And here we are climbing up the steps to get to the island's plateau. And we were greeted by the first of the charismatic species that we ran across. This is a booby, and obviously it's a red-footed booby, right? And that's correct, it's a red-footed booby. There were also masked boobies on the path. At this stage of the journey, we were still more shy than the birds. These masked boobies seemed to be blocking our path, and those big beaks looked like they could do some serious damage. But these birds are quite friendly, or at least they're not very interested in us. They're really handsome birds. They get their food the way gannets do, by diving into the ocean from high up in the sky. It's a really spectacular sight when you're in a boat and all these birds are plunging into the water from up above you. It's I'm sorry I don't have a video of that sort of thing. They apparently have little territories. You can tell where a booby's been sitting. They sit in this one place, and then they defecate in various directions, so you can see. They just shoot guano out from all directions, so you can see where they've been. This is the Galapagos ground dove, which is quite a pretty little bird. This is a view of the surface of Genovese, the plateau I was talking about. Obviously, a lava flow. The tiny specks, I don't think you could see them, but if you could see them, you would see that there are thousands of wedge-tailed storm petrels flying around in the air in the sky. We never got a really good look at them. That's a lava gull in the foreground. This thing is an owl pellet, or casting. The petrels nest in crevices in the island, and there's a population of short-eared owls that prey on them. As you probably know, owls eat their prey whole and then upchuck the indigestible parts, in this case, mostly feathers. I was kind of surprised at how big the pellet really was. I mean, that's a film can for comparison. Here we are going back down. This is Darwin's view of the bay a view of Darwin's Bay from the plateau headed back down the steps. It's really a collapsed volcanic caldera. This is a view of the walls, which were very popular with seals and sea lions that hung out on the rocks on the walls. After lunch, we landed on the other side of the bay on a beautiful island beach, sand beach, complete with sea lions flaked out in the sun. You can see them all around here. There was a forested area here and lots of red-footed booby nests, some of them with chicks, like in this picture here. That's mama right there. It's the only booby species that nests in trees. He's a beautiful guy, don't you think? Here's a red-footed female preening herself. These birds are quite tame. I was only about 3 or 4 feet away. That bird just really wasn't trouble at all. These are great frigate birds here. You can distinguish them from the other type of frigate bird, which is a magnificent, which also lives in the Galapagos, by the green sheen of the feathers on its back. These are males with their partly inflated gular pouches. I've read that it takes them about 20 minutes to get one of these pouches fully inflated. And apparently they are irresistible to females. In addition to inflating their pouches, the male will tip his head all the way back over on his back and clack its beak rapidly and loudly so they get the attention of females that may fly over. The great frigate bird is a flyer of unmatched skill. It gets all its food by harassing boobies and other seabirds in the air until they drop their food, at which time the frigate bird swoops down and catches it before it hits the water or the ground. They are nearly helpless on the ground unless they have a long, clear shot into the wind. I found one in a forest on another island in Belize that had somehow gotten itself down on the ground in the forest. And the poor bird did not have enough lift in its wings to get up enough to get out of the trees. I had to pick that bird up and take him up a tower and let him go into the wind before he was able to fly away. This is a swallowtail gull, one of the 2 gull species in the Galapagos. This bird is unusual. It's said to feed only at night. This is the immature of that species. And this is the other gull species, the lava gull. So we went back to the ship in the Pangas, and we sailed overnight. And the next morning, we had cruised all night, millions of stars overhead. Though I confess we were usually so tired we didn't spend much time on deck after dinner, watching the sky and the phosphorescence of the waves. In the morning there was a sea fog and a mirage-like effect, which made the breakers in this picture here look absolutely humongous. I think it's this sort of sea fog that led sailors to call the islands enchanted, since they seem to float above in the sea. Herman Melville was the author who perpetuated the name Enchanted Isles. Melville also referred to these islands as 5 and 20 heaps of cinders dumped here and there in an outside city lot, which was less romantic. We crossed the equator, and the fog burned off quickly. Here's a view of Isabella Island and a volcanic peak called Wolf, which is about 5,600 feet high, as we cross the equator to the south this time. This is our guide Ernesto with Cheryl with iguanas at a place called Punta Espanola on Fernandina. After huevos rancheros for breakfast, we landed on Fernandina Island at a place called Punta Espanosa, where really big marine iguanas live. There's some in this picture here. Cheryl is standing with her Ecuadorian guide, plus iguanas, and you had to be kind of careful where you walk so you didn't step on them. They were also not the least bit frightened. Beautiful guy, don't you think? Fernandina is the youngest of the Galapagos. Its central volcanic crater collapsed in 1968, and there have been 4 lava flows in the crater since then, through 2000. These guys are evolved from land iguanas, which obviously came from the main continent of South America at some time in the distant past. and they evolved to eat algae and become marine creatures, the only ones on Earth. Apparently, this guy hasn't any problem at all with a lava lizard climbing up and down on his head. Now, when iguanas get into territorial disagreement, usually over nesting sites, they butt heads until one of them backs off. Kind of like humans, don't you think? Here's a sea lion at Punta Espinosa. They're really irresistible creatures. And here's a flightless cormorant, Galapagos flightless cormorant, well, along with crabs, the Sally Lightfoot crabs, and some ruddy turnstones. Over time, this cormorant has lost its ability to fly. Its wings are now just stubby little wings that it uses to fly underwater, essentially. Apparently, the lack of predation meant that they didn't really need to be able to fly anymore. Anyhow, it's another evolutionary mystery. The profusion of life in the Galapagos when you're walking around puts you in mind of a three-ring circus. There's so much to see that it's really hard to know what you should look at first. What passes for sand on the beach is really a mixture of shells and sea urchin spines, as you see in this picture. Imagine our surprise to see an American oystercatcher with 2 eggs right alongside the path. In fact, the eggs are visible right there. Right along the path we were walking. No problem. You certainly couldn't do that to an oystercatcher anywhere on the East Coast here. Unfortunately, there was a dead whale washed ashore. The guide thought it was a Cuvier's beaked whale. The smell was pretty fierce. On the way back to the ship, you can see clearly here that we're walking on lava flow. And there's Isabella in the background with one of its volcanoes. The Galapagos even has endemic Galapagos grasshopper. Here's a view of iguanas. There's probably a sea lion in there somewhere. And our ship, the Alta, in the background. You can see here that we weren't really leading a really hard life. This is a typical lunch setup on the foredeck of the Alta. And here's the other half of our gang. We had lots of fruit. The food was pretty darn good. Our cabin for Cheryl and me was embarrassingly large, spacious, about 2 or 3 times the size of anybody else's cabin on the trip. Really nice. There was a nice bathroom for each cabin, air conditioned, plenty of hot water for hot showers, which really felt good after a day of hiking around in the hot sun. So this is a trip a lot of you could do right now. It's not that tough. Okay, here are the famous ones. This is a Galapagos tortoise. We motored off right away after lunch and put in a place called Urbina Bay on Isabella Island, just across the Bolivar Straits from Fernandina, where we had spent the morning. It was one of our nicest walks inland, made particularly exciting by our first views of the famous Galapagos tortoise. Each island has its own species or subspecies. Darwin was told that an expert could tell what island a tortoise came from by the shape of its shell. Handsome fellow, don't you think? They're vegetarian. They move in slow motion and did not seem to care much whether we were there or not. You have the sense that you're looking at a very ancient form of life. One that has seen the eons roll by and couldn't possibly be surprised by anything new. That's tortoise cat. That's my natural history bug coming out. Sorry about that. What the tortoises like to eat is poison apples from this tree, a tree like this. The apples are said to be lethal to humans, but the tortoises thrive on them. And the apple seeds apparently germinate better for having passed through the tortoise's digestive system. This is a land iguana at Urbana Bay on Isabella Island, our first land iguana. Clearly, the marine iguanas evolved from an ancestral land iguana, maybe like this one. As far as I know, the only marine iguanas on Earth live in the Galapagos. The yellow color seems to be more characteristic of the land iguana. This little flower is called Darwin's daisy and was named by him. We finished our walk at Urbana Bay by hiking along the beach, just back of jagged hunks of lava. It was getting on towards sunset. So we polished off the day with a swim in crystal clear water with pelicans circling around overhead, and our ship just off there. It was a beautiful evening. The sun went down with a wonderful pink glow in the sky above the Alta. Again, we sailed overnight, arriving in the morning farther south on Isabella at Elizabeth Bay, where we rode the pangas into a mangrove lagoon to look for turtles. And we saw lots of turtles, green sea turtles. And this is the only decent picture I got, which isn't the greatest picture in the world anyway. The lagoon mangroves were full of pelicans, blue boobies, and yellow warbers as well. The Galapagos penguin is the only penguin to live on the equator. Just to the mouth, off the mouth of Elizabeth Bay, are some little islands called the Mariellas, just little volcanic cinder and rock cones that barely stick up from the water. And as you can see, the iguanas like them. The rocks are covered up with iguanas. It's amazing to me how these critters manage to climb up where they do. Blue-footed boobies also like these rocks. Not hard to see why they're called blue-footed, is it? We actually put the sails up for a while after we left Elizabeth Bay, but the winds were so shifty we had to go back to motoring, which is what we did most of the time. The sails were really for looks. We anchored at Tagus Cove and took a walk inland to look over the island. Here's a view north on Isabella, which looks like pretty darn barren country, lots of lava flow. Though it's more green now in March when we were there than it would be later in the year when little rain ever falls. This is our whole group. The man just behind Cheryl and me is John Lambert, who was a classmate of mine at Princeton and a roommate at Wisconsin. He's the one that put this trip together. Sailing overnight again, we crossed the equator going north, rounded the southern tip of Isabella, and headed southeasterly to Santiago Island, mooring at James Bay at a place called Puerto Egas. Egas was a German who made salt here in the lagoons for some years. Agus and his buddies managed to exterminate all the land iguanas on Santiago by eating them. There was a baby sea lion playing with a feather in a little tide pool among the rocks at the far end of the beach. I had a good time watching him play with that feather. We walked inland first and then returned by way of the rocky coast. The lava flows erode in strange ways, creating grottos where seals hang out. Do you see that heron just to the right of center there? Well, I thought I would sneak up on him and get a great photograph. So I proceeded to walk very carefully, taking a picture every few feet. And I got closer and closer in stages, stopping to take pictures. And I finally realized that he didn't give a hoot where I was. I was only about 3 feet away from him when I finally took this picture. It makes you feel like an idiot. This is a good example of the lava tide pools and crabs and marine iguanas sprinkled all around. Like I say, it's hard to know what to look at. These are Sally Lightfoot crabs. They're kind of pretty, aren't they? The one on the left here is molting. You can see it splitting its carapace with a bunch of bubbles along a horizontal plane. Yeah, there it is. Along a horizontal plane here. It will soon become a very vulnerable soft-shell crab. It appeared that the mature crabs don't have any predators. Here's a lava heron, which is a fairly common bird of the shoreline. It reminds you a little bit of a green heron, doesn't it? All right, here's a picture. When iguanas challenge each other, they do little push-ups. I've seen lizards do this too. So at my urging, Cheryl is doing push-ups to see if the iguanas will feel challenged. They were totally unimpressed with this foolishness. Here's a better picture of Cheryl. Just as with iguanas, each island has its own species of lava lizard, a fairly common resident. From Santiago, we sailed around the north side of the island to a small island called Bartolome, which is a very popular anchorage. We did a little bit of snorkeling here. That's the so-called pinnacle at Bartolome. Then we rode the pangas over to the island itself to climb up what they call Heartbreaker Hill, and walked up this hill to the top. It interested me that these plants you see it growing on the desert here are spacing themselves for survival, so they don't compete with each other for lack of water. I think sagebrush does the same sort of thing in our deserts. And here's a view of the volcanic landscape from the top of Heartbreaker Hill. It's sort of an otherworldly moonscape kind of thing. And from up on the hill, a view of the pinnacle and the Bartolome Harbor. After an overnight sail, we awoke to the tranquility of Puerto Ayora Harbor at dawn. This is where most of the people on the island live. And here's the trash boat arriving. You would think this trash boat is departing, but it was arriving, and how it was going to get the trash from our ship on board, I just have no idea. Each tour boat saves all its non-biodegradable stuff and offloads it here. When I wrote this, I thought it got shipped to the mainland, but I read since that they have enormous mountains of trash, and that's not what's happening. So that's a problem. Puerto Ayora is the biggest town in the Galapagos, and its waterfront is appropriately colorful. All the birds here were attracted to some fishermen who were cutting up fish nearby. This is the home of the Darwin Research Station also, which has a whole bunch of different kinds of cactuses growing all around. This is the candelabra cactus. And this is a tree form of the prickly pear. Here's the Darwin Research Station as a tortoise breeding facility. But the tortoise in this picture, and I'm sure you've read about this guy, is a sad story. His name is Lonesome George, and that's Lonesome George. He's from Pinta Island, and the very last of his breed. The Darwin Station is attempting to introduce the correct subspecies to each island where they were wiped out. But there are no females left for poor old George. He tries to copulate with rocks but cannot ejaculate. However, they've been successful with the Espanola tortoises. They had some males from that island, but couldn't get them to breed. Then the station found a male in a zoo in San Diego that had been taken 96 years before from Espanola. And this guy brought to the station stimulated competition, and breeding began to be successful. And a footnote on Lonesome George, he died in 2012. And they think his age was about 110. Some of the tortoises still alive today in the Galapagos may have actually seen Charles Darwin. These animals were in great danger of being wiped out in their early years. Sailing ships stopped at the Galapagos regularly to stop up on food and water. Remember, these are a couple hundred miles out in the ocean from South America, so sailing ships were looking for places where they could haul out and get water and so forth. The tortoises, some of which weighed up to 600 pounds, were floated out to the ships and stored alive on board for a meat source. It is said that they would survive without food or water for a year or more, and were obviously highly valued for this keeping quality, fresh meat being a really rare and desirable commodity. This is a Galapagos finch. This and the next several pictures are Darwin's famous ground finches, on which some of his evolutionary theory was based. When he was in the island, he actually didn't recognize that it would have been important for him to designate which island each one of these finches came from. And it was only, kind of backtracking that he figured out that these things had evolved independently on each island. There are 11 species of them, all evolved from a common ancestor. This black beak on this large beak bird indicates a breeding male. Here's a really large beaked Darwin finch. The size of the beak is highly significant to a bird's survival. The thicker the beak, the larger, drier seeds the bird can eat. Long-term studies conducted by two Princeton biologists, Peter and Rosemary Grant, have shown that these birds show thicker or thinner bills depending on the wetness or dryness of the preceding year. The unfit ones don't survive. Their work has become a landmark study on evolution, on how it works to produce new species. No one had believed such effects could be observed over such a short time period. Here's the finch family tree. The birds have evolved to fill different food niches. There's one much like a warbler, another that uses twigs to fish bugs from trees like a woodpecker. The thin-billed ones do well in wet times when there are lots of small seeds. The thick-billed ones do better in dry times when only the big tough seeds are available as a last resort food. The grants were able to document changes in the populations by measuring beak thicknesses. They commented that a difference in beak thickness of only 1/2 millimeter was the difference between survival and death. Being very interested in birds, I had thought to try and identify the different finch species, but I very quickly gave up the idea when I saw how the species grade so gradually into each other. This plant is called tribulus, which produces the hard seed, about 1/4 inch in diameter, covered with heavy spikes. This is the food of last resort in really dry times, which is usable only by the large-beaked finches. We did a little drive to the high central portion of Santa Cruz, which is where Puerto Ayara is, where the weather is just a little bit cooler and wetter, and where, therefore, supports some farming. Here we encountered a sinkhole. This is the walls of the sinkhole. It's really a collapsed hole in an old lava tube. We got to walk inside this lava tube, which was about 30 feet in diameter. You can see only because the ceiling had partly fallen in. I suppose this entire island must be full of lava tube holes like this. Such holes are formed when an island must be full of lava tube. Such holes are formed when the lava flow cools on the outside, but the lava inside stays molten and drains out, leaving a hole or tube in the lava. Now you all know what that is, right? Right? Name? Vermilion flycatcher, yeah. This was another of my famous bird stalking adventures. I sneaked up on this guy, sneaked up on him, and finally realized he didn't give a flip where I was. He was happy. But, you can't help wondering, how come so much tameness here? You couldn't get anywhere near that close to a vermilion flycatcher in this country. No way. Why should they be afraid of us now? As far as I know, nobody goes around shooting them or anything. We had a lovely long ride in a heavy swell overnight to Hood Island, which is also called Española. It's confusing, but all the Galapagos Islands have both English and Spanish names, so you can kind of get screwed up knowing where you are. We landed at a place called Punta Suarez, and there's a marine iguana, the red and green Christmas variety on Hood Island. They call them Christmas iguanas. They really are pretty spectacular. They're evolved from the same ancestor that all the other iguanas evolved from. Iguanas dig holes in the beach for nests. This is one of the primary reasons that visitors are kept on marked trails. You would think this would feel very regimented, but there's so much to see that it doesn't really bother you at all. There's plenty to look at. This is the famous hood mockingbird, a very bold fellow. A similar one, and each island has its own variety of mockingbird. A similar one, Isabella, whacked me on the head when I tried to take its picture in his personal tree. In fact, he tried to whack each one of us in our group as we passed under him. Here's one we watched catch, kill, and eat this immature Sally Lightfoot crab. Apparently the crabs are pretty edible when they're young. Maybe that's why they're black, to blend in with the black lava along the shores. Punta Suarez was one of the most scenic spots we saw. The lava cliffs are undercut, and at one place there's a hole in the overhanging ledge. And when the surf rolls in under the ledge, air and water are trapped, sending a giant plume of water and air up through the hole as much as 80 feet high, lasting so long you think you're looking at a geyser. Really fun to watch. And it doesn't hurt to have some boobies in the foreground too. You can see all those striped rocks where the where the boobies have been sitting. A place to sort of sit and wonder. There's a swallowtail gull preening on the cliffs down below, and a masked booby that seemed to be asking something or other. Maybe what this other booby was looking at. This is a pair of the endemic Galapagos hawks. Here's a sea lion and a heron on a rocky beach. More tide pools and critters. You can just see there's a Christmas iguana, sea lions, marine iguanas. Just mind-boggling. Leaving fabulous Punta Suarez, we had lunch on our ship and then motored over to Gardner Bay with its gleaming white coral sand beach, littered, as you can see, with scads of sleepy sea lions. We saw a turtle nest here, and we also snorkeled around a little island. It was a big thrill when two big adult sea lions joined us on our snorkel. They are so big and so agile compared to our clumsy efforts that it's a little bit scary, especially when they open their jaws and come straight at you. They got a lot of teeth in those jaws. This was our last island visit, an island called South Plaza. Ernesto, the guide, is leading the way on an early morning foray. You should know, if you ever go there, that there are 3 levels of guides. Ernesto is top level, highly trained in natural history and very fluent in English. You must make sure you get such a guide, as it will make all the difference in your understanding and appreciation of what you're seeing. If you're going to go this far, you should make sure you do it right. Land iguanas were not wiped out on South Plaza. You see the brown stain on the rocks to the right of the sea lion? This is actually hair rubbed off the rocks, onto the rocks by bachelor sea lions, according to Ernesto. He called it the sea lion barbershop. We watch these animals climbing down the rocky cliffs to the sea. It's just amazing what they can handle. These are uplifted carbonate rocks, which have been polished smooth by generations of sea lions, rubbing their bodies and their feces and their hair over these rocks, have produced a very marble-like polish. Here are a couple of swallowtail gulls at South Plaza. Now we're back at Baltra, getting ready to get off our ship and go back home. It was a fairly short ride and a departure from the Alta. Here in the harbor, we found a sea lion snoozing in the back end of a boat. And we watched another sea lion climb out of the water into this little thing called the Titanic. I don't know how they do that, but they do. This little guy was sleeping it off in the shade of a pumping station. And I think it's kind of an appropriate image, which is kind of how we felt as we left the island, the Islas Encantadas. Sort of happy, tired, kind of dazed, by the experience. That's it. Be happy to try and answer any questions. I was going to throw in something about the environmental and tourist situation. There's a tourist association that controls the ships and the landings, and the Darwin Research Station is involved in that. And there's a Darwin Research Foundation as well. And they are all trying very hard to maintain these islands in such a way that it will continue to be this sort of fantastic UNESCO World Heritage Site that it is today. They're having trouble with fishermen coming in from other countries, China, Japan, and whatnot, because the Ecuadorian Navy is not all that big and powerful, and the fishing waters around the Galapagos are really fantastically good. And they're having trouble also with Ecuadorians wanting to move from the mainland over to the Galapagos, because Ecuador is under population pressure, seems like all those countries are. And the Galapagos obviously cannot support a very large population of people. The water supply is short, and there isn't much capability of farming, and it's just limited. So there are some efforts to keep it under control. And of course, global warming and climate change are going to have an impact, because if the ocean waters warm up too much, if an El Nino gets to be a more permanent thing, and the Humboldt current doesn't blast its load of cold water-loving krill and food of that sort, then the marine ecosystem will suffer very badly. So the future is up for grabs. But right at the moment, I think, if any of you did choose to go there, you would find a situation pretty similar to what I've just described. I don't think it's changed that much in all the years since I was there. Any questions anybody would like to ask?
If I remember from your first slide, you were there in about 2000. Is that correct?
It was a little before that.
Okay. And it looked like you were able to get quite close to the animals that you were photographing, or you had a very powerful lens to do so?
No, I did not have a powerful lens. This was an ordinary garden variety. Well, it was a Nikon F3, but it was an ordinary thing. I didn't have to use zoom lenses at all.
Okay, because when I was there in 2024, we were not allowed to get any closer than 6 feet to any of the
6 feet?
wildlife. 6 feet. We had to stay 6 feet away from any of the wildlife. And so that was quite a difference from when you were there.
Well, the trails themselves, the animals were within 3 feet of the trail. You know, you might be right alongside the trail.
Yeah.
So it would have been hard to stay 6 feet from them.
I saw the black and white trail markers that marked the trails, but we just had to wait for them to move.
Oh, I see.
They wouldn't let us get any, our guide, I'll put it that way, our guide would not let us, according to the rules, get any closer than 6 feet.
They may have tightened the rules up since I was there.
Maybe they have. I guess they have.
It seems to me quite possible that might have happened.
Yeah.
It's so tempting, you know, you feel like you could reach out and touch those creatures, and you just don't want to do that.
I seem to remember that there was a problem with goats some years ago. What has happened with the goat population?
There may still be on one island. I looked on the internet to see about things like that. They've had big eradication campaigns to get rid of goats on most of the islands, and rats as well. And they're still struggling with that, the legacy of what people brought before. And there are a bunch of invasive plants as well. I don't know anything about that part. Yeah, it's such a special sort of a place. You can see that it's just delicately balanced between being able to go and look at it and destroying it. And unfortunately, that's true of a lot of places that we treasure.
Over here, Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. That was really interesting. That's the best tour of there that I've seen, but I wondered, you didn't mention anything about if the guide or anybody else there mentioned anything about Darwin and when he came there and what he did and what he found and whether they would say, this kind of animal here, that's the exact thing that Darwin saw, or the ship anchored over there. And I just wondered, did they bother with that history at all?
Well, yeah, they identified that Darwin daisy, for instance, and there were some other references to Darwin when he was there. But the fact that it's called the Darwin Research Station, that's another thing, and the tortoise breeding facility. They didn't talk much about Darwin himself. I don't, from what I've read about Darwin, his idea about evolution wasn't anywhere near well formed when he was in the Galapagos. And I don't think it started to sink in the importance of what he had seen in the Galapagos until he was back in England and other naturalists were looking over his specimens with him, that they began to realize that there was evidence that there was speciation on these individual islands. And I think Darwin probably spent the rest of his life kicking himself that he hadn't adequately marked his samples so that he could help with that proof.
Yeah, and I believe he basically sat on this whole project for about 10 years, not quite understanding what he had, until he was told that somebody else was going to write a book about it. And that's
right.
My recollection, at least.
Alfred Wallace Russell came up with the idea and sent him a paper. And when Darwin saw that paper, he thought, oh my God, this guy's got the idea. I better get off my backside and do something. But you know what held Darwin back, I think, was the fact that evolution takes the Christian, the religious theory out of the creation of species. And Darwin his wife was very religious, and he lived at a time when that was extremely important to people. And I think he was reluctant to be willing to rock the boat. So he kind of stalled and delayed until it looked like his idea would be scooped by Alfred Russell, who had spent a lot of time in the South Pacific, Borneo, and places like that, and was beginning to see the same kind of island speciation and beginning to speculate that, you know, these beautiful birds of paradise, why in the world do they exist? You know, obviously not for human eyes, because there weren't any humans around to look at them. And began to wonder about things like natural evolution, natural selection, and so on. It's kind of an interesting story. There's some books written about Darwin, but I think his wife was so religious, I think he was really reluctant to rock the boat, because he really rocked it. He really rocked it. They were still debating whether creation was only 6,000 years old. There were some geologists that were still trying to make the case that these mountains were one heck of a lot older than that. And come along with a theory like evolution on top of all that other stuff was really, they didn't think there was enough time for all these species to have evolved independently. Anyway, you've read the stories about people arguing about creation theory and so on. So he was really rocking the boat. But they are a wonderful example. There are, of course, other examples in the world where you can see the effects of evolution having working. And anybody who's watched birds around the world enough knows that they have managed to evolve in many different ways from what was obviously common ancestor. In fact, you know, birds are considered to be the descendants of the dinosaurs. The earliest birds were very reptilian, very dinosaur-like. Anyhow, anybody else?
I saw some views of what looked like clear water.
It was.
Uh-huh.
Crystal clear. It was a little on the chilly side, too. a sort of halfway wetsuit felt really good. It was a little chilly on your bare flesh after a very short time. So who's going to go there tomorrow?
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is a wonderful, wonderful place.
There's a book that you would enjoy if you haven't already read it called Darwin's Armada.
Darwin's Armada? No, I don't know
It's
that
about
one.
4 friends of Darwin, scientists who supported him